I grew up mixed race in a very white, very working class neighbourhood in Liverpool, in the northwest of England during the late 1980s and 1990s. It was very clear who did and did not live in this area, and therefore who did and did not belong here. Many assumptions were made about families that looked like mine. Most likely, we owned the local fish and chip shop and Chinese takeaway and lived in the rooms above said shop. There was a popular sitcom at the time, I'm not sure if some of the teachers recall it. It was called Bread, and it depicted your typical Scouse family. So we can see the cast in the photo on the left, and in the photo on the right, we can see a few members of my family. So we weren't quite fitting in with the demographics. And I feel like it's important, in order for me to share my ideas today, that you have a little bit of background for context. So my dad was born into a Hock Chu family here in Singapore. He had a very traditional Chinese upbringing. He was the eldest son, one of 6. You can see him in the photo on the right. He's the taller of the 2 boys in the back row. After his education, he joined the Merchant Navy, and we'll come back to that momentarily. Mum was also one of 6 children. She was born in Liverpool and was the youngest daughter. We can see Mum in the photo on the right. She's the smaller of the 2 girls. Mum was born to a mother of Irish and English descent and a father from Shanghai. It was still pretty controversial back then for mixed-race couples to be quite open about the families that they were having. So my maternal grandparents were a huge part of my upbringing, and it was scorned upon at the time for a white woman to choose to be with an East Asian man. Granddad arrived at Liverpool Port uneducated, illiterate, and unable to speak any English. Somehow, he managed to find Nan, they fell in love, and they had 6 children of their own. They not only raised these 6 children, they also fostered many, many kids along the years, and they were doing this all while running a small business. So I cannot, for the life of me, imagine what dinner time looked like, but I completely understand why Granddad used to insist on absolute silence at the dinner table. Mum and Dad met under very similar circumstances, and when Dad, who was in the Merchant Navy, docked in Liverpool, he met and fell for June. So they corresponded with one another for quite some time via handwritten letters. And eventually he proposed to her via letter, and he came over, or went over rather, to England, and they got married so they could start a family of their own. Now, whether it was about my maternal grandparents or my own parents, even though there was quite a number of years between the 2 couples, it was still considered quite controversial for people to be setting up families like this. And my dad, like all good immigrants, really had to prove himself when it came to the workplace and social settings. Then they had me, and thus began their journey of trying to raise a child with an awareness of the many traditions and cultures that they were inheriting. So we can see my first Chinese New Year. I hadn't quite got the hang of the red packets at that point. And then we can also see my first Christmas at my grandparents' house. 5 years later, and my baby sister Jessica arrived. I adored being a big sister, I still do, and this completed our immediate family. I feel it's really important for me to recognize that childhood at home was really a blessing. It was a beautiful childhood, and I have no complaints, because I'm going to share some less pleasant memories from my childhood, and I know that for some kids, they really have difficulty making a choice between whether they want to be at home or in school, and at the very least, I didn't have that dilemma to make. So becoming a big sister and starting school coincided pretty much with one another, and as Jess and Mum were getting acquainted back home, I was quickly discovering that not only did I not look like my classmates, but I wasn't really having the same experiences as them. And I don't remember this personally, but my parents have told me that as early as nursery, the teachers called them in and made a request that they take me to some big chain fast food restaurants because I couldn't relate to my peers after the weekend when they had gone for burgers and fried chicken. So on the right is a class photo, the only one I have in my possession. I'm pretty sure you can find me quite easily. I also think you might be able to find Sadiq from Yemen pretty easily. Sadiq joined our class for 2 or 3 terms, and when he walked in through the door and the teacher introduced him to us, we set eyes on one another and we were so excited. I don't think our excitement was because we thought we looked like one another, because we didn't. And I don't think it was because we thought we might have the same background, because we didn't. But I do think that in some way, as young as we were, we recognized our otherness from the rest of the class. My gifts to Sadiq were pretty paltry. It was showing him around the school, sharing my snacks with him at playtime, and teaching him some basic vocabulary. I remember that pencil was the first word. Sadiq's gift was much more generous to me, and for several months, I didn't feel so lonely in the playground. So here we are at the Lunchbox moment. And it didn't matter that I had the latest peach and lilac Forever Friends lunchbox complete with matching flask. What mattered to the kids in my class was what was inside the lunchbox, which is ironic given they weren't able to apply this rule to the people they were spending their days with. While the other kids were munching on ham sandwiches with sliced white bread, salt and vinegar crisps, Dairy Lee Lunchables, and Capri Sun pouches, I was very tentatively peeling back the lid on mini Tupperware boxes of leftover fried rice and delicious, but at the time embarrassing, chicken wings on the bone. And so I tried to counter this. I tried to assimilate, and I asked my parents if they would let me have the school canteen hot lunches. This was short-lived because apparently I don't like soft, beige food. Soggy chips, pies with unidentifiable meat, and custard with a skin far thicker than I'll ever be able to develop myself. So I quickly switched back. I asked to go back to pack lunches, and I don't know how I did it, but I must have made some sort of request to Mum and Dad that my lunches be somewhat less attention-grabbing. However, this was during the height of the food pyramid of the 1990s, so I ended up going back to school with tuna sandwiches on brown bread, fresh fruit, and little boxes of raisins. So it was an improvement, but not a huge one. Thus began my quest for whiteness. I remember in the classroom one day, the sun was falling through the window, and it landed on the golden hairs of one of my classmates' arms. And I was enamored by these tiny golden hairs because they represented everything I couldn't have. I wanted to be fair, I wanted to be blonde, and I wanted to be blue-eyed. But I couldn't, and I knew that I couldn't change my physicality when it came to whiteness. So what else could I do? And I would daydream scribbling the surnames of other children in my notebook next to my name, not because I wanted to marry them, but because I wanted to see what would it sound like to be properly British. One of my more shameful memories is when we were learning fractions, and I applied my newfound knowledge to calculating how many generations it would take for me to water down my Chinese lineage. I'm not proud, but I think that was my reality at the time, because I wanted to remove myself from that which was so painful. As I got older, birthday gatherings and other such occasions meant that I was requesting that we only go to American-style diners and classy restaurants like the infamous Caesar's Palace in Liverpool. The menus at these restaurants consisted of chicken burgers, curly fries, and thick milkshakes. You could stand a spoon in them, they were so thick. By no means were we to go to any Chinese restaurants. I didn't want to see the brash neon lighting, the big fish tanks, and the loud crowds. I didn't want the admittedly delicious dim sum, the fragrant wok-fried goodness. No, I didn't want any of that. And I certainly didn't want an entire fish to land on the table only for one of my relatives to poke the eyeball with a chopstick and ask which of the kids was going to be the lucky one to eat it. My friends would not be witness to these atrocities. Cue the 2000s and my university years. Something or somebody flipped a switch, and now East Asian cinema, music, pop culture, and food suddenly began to gain traction in the global north. I swung heavily from one extreme to another. I had gone from rejecting any part of me that looked Asian to trying to embrace as much of it as I possibly could, but I realized that I was doing it for all the wrong reasons, and throughout these years, I allowed myself to be fetishized, I'll admit it, and I also was allowing my eating disorders that had already been in place for close to a decade to run rampant. Because while my face was telling people that I was Asian, my body wasn't. I was born with a big kink and wave in my hair. I've got wide hips and thick thighs, and I needed to be thin. I needed to be pretty. I needed to be petite. I needed to be kawaii. I needed to be passive. I needed to be invisible. Let's fast forward a few years, and I landed myself a job here in Singapore, teaching very cute, very young learners. And I thought, wonderful, the fatherland. Let's go back and make contact with all of the missing parts of this jigsaw puzzle, right? Wrong. Now I was facing questions like, why don't you know how to write your Chinese name, and how come you mistranslated it? Why can't you speak Mandarin? Why didn't your dad insist that you learn? Can you use chopsticks? Yes, adeptly, thank you. And the best one, saved for that uncle, who everybody has, at Chinese New Year, whereby plates of delicious food would be passed around, and he would skip me because you better not eat this one and get fatter. In 2020, I came across a number of books that helped me start to lean towards being at more peace with belonging neither here nor there. Some of these books spoke explicitly to those experiences, others less so, but in either case, I would typically find myself setting up a Zoom call with my parents, and we would have these long, delicate conversations around the difficulty my maternal grandparents faced, and my mum's confusion around her identity, my dad's struggles when he first got to England, and quite frankly, our family's deep-seated colorism and how we could work through that. I started to realize it wasn't about trying to be white, or trying to be Asian, or trying to be British, or trying to figure out what it meant to be Singaporean. It was about allowing all of these layers that were mine to help me become who I am. I realized that so many of these realizations came via food-related memories. It was Saturday afternoons with Dad and Jess, seeking out an Asian supermarket so he could find ingredients to make a delicious dinner that Tesco and Asda were not stocking. It was about walking along the high street with Mum and Nan and ending the day with hot tea and salty buttered toast. It was about Chinese New Year, but not Chinese New Year the way it's celebrated in Singapore, no offense. It was about Chinese New Year Liverpool style. It was about cold, damp, smoky air filling the streets and red firecracker paper underneath your feet. It was about spending our red packet money in what I believe might have been a money laundering place at the time, but never mind, we got some really great gifts with that money. It was about Christmases and Nan's infamous Christmas pudding and probably even more famous rum sauce because she would inevitably nearly set the kitchen alight year on year. As I get older, I care less about what people think about me, but I also feel like I'm able to lean more heavily into who I really am and the people that have made me that way. And so my cousin's sister and I belong in a group chat, and whenever any of us make noodles with cabbage and bacon, we tell the others, because noodles with cabbage and bacon is China and Ireland. It's Grandad and Nan. It's a hug in a bowl. My aunt passed away earlier this year, and Christmas will be difficult because she used to throw these huge Boxing Night buffets. And the other day, I was in the supermarket and I saw a salmon and cream cheese pinwheel, which they were the height of elegance as far as she was concerned. And I was able to look at the snack and smile and cry and remember her. And every time I see or I taste a food and I remember this person, this place, this situation, I remember who I am, because I am sensitive like my mum and detail-oriented like my dad. I'm sharp-eyed like my granddad. Don't let the glasses fool you. And I'm sharp-tongued like my nan and my aunt when necessary. I am all of these things. I feel it's really important that I recognize that I'm giving this talk in Singapore and that the people experiencing a lunchbox moment probably don't look like me here. But I wonder, who has experienced a lunchbox moment in this room? Who has been the perpetrator of one? Who has been a bystander? And I ask us these questions not for us to feel guilty, but so that we can reflect and maybe own some mistakes and apologize if it's possible, and move forward not only with good intentions of doing better, but trying to find out, what does it mean to do better? What does it mean to move forward with grace and compassion and see that other person who seems to be getting whispered about, or an elbow's being nudged because of the food they eat, or the name they have, or the clothes they're wearing? I wonder what I would say to little Jen, the version of me who so desperately wanted to be white. And I honestly don't think I would change anything that happened along the way. But what I might just whisper to her is that peace follows the pain. Because all of these memories, good and bad, they've helped me understand and appreciate my wholeness, who I am, who I want to be, and how I want to step out into the rest of my days. I invite all of us to embrace our heritage, whether that's through food or something else, because your food isn't smelly, and your name isn't difficult to pronounce, and your clothes aren't strange. We just need to be better as people in trying to understand others. Thank you.